Okay, everyone, Mrs. Wallace again. This is part two of the Confucius overview. I will try to keep this short for you, just a few additional things as we move into how Confucianism may have been significant during the post-classical period. But we were looking at some of the key ideas about Confucianism in the time period of Confucius. And one of the things is this idea of education really serving as a way to improve individuals. And, Confucius kind of has the idea that this can apply to anyone who really is willing to spend the time really gaining a great deal of education. And there's very specific things to include in that education. So it's not any education. Confucius will have some particular ideas for what that education will look like. But with this almost like it's a positive philosophy in a sense. There's a belief that there are members of society who can achieve this high level of, ethical, intellectual cultivation. And as a result of that, there will be then those individuals who can serve in the state. So for Confucius, there really is a way to consider, his ideas of the superior man as a solution to some of the problems of the day. Because the government was so unstable and so challenged with all of this like political and military chaos, he was kind of under the impression that some of the issues where local leaders, warlords, were taking on, so much power, that was like a corrupt kind of problem. People weren't adhering to the social order and the way it was supposed to be held, and they were ignoring, in a sense, some of the role of what the dynastic leaders were supposed to be offering. And so to Confucius, the social order of the society is not only connected to people gaining education, but there would be certain leaders in government who would have the ethical integrity and background to be able to rule in such a fashion that there wouldn't become such corruption or such problems of the state. So a lot of Confucius's ideas are really using education and learning to create leaders who then serve the state in a capacity in an ethical way, and that this becomes useful for the government. It's kind of like almost like front loading the government with conscientious individuals who are going to rule with a certain set of ideas. And Confucius is, problem solving, again, in a time period where there's a great deal of backlash against the Zhou dynasty and a lot of like kind of greed and power of local political leaders. So he's like responding to that particular problem in his own time. There are some key virtues that we could argue Confucius really is arguing for. So in this kind of cultivation of moral and ethical individuals, people who are going to rise in a certain way to becoming the leaders, what was it that would really be cultivated? And, of course, how would this be done? Because Confucius is ultimately going to draw on some key works that were created during the earlier Zhou period, the Book of Odes or the Book of Changes, some really key texts that would become like the key texts that would define how to establish some of these key virtues. But the virtues that would be cultivated, the first would be something known as Ren. This is, can mean a variety of things, but we'll just put it into the category of meaning, showing respect of others, seeing others as, important, kindness, if you will. There's like certain kind of treatment of other people that becomes really important. And Ren is all about that. It might be the way one acts kind of within a society, of others. And this is maybe most important. There's also a concept known as qi, which could be maybe translated as like intelligence or wisdom, but it's not only in like a pure sense in terms of like knowledge or scholarship, even though that's going to be important to Confucius. There's also this sense that knowledge has to be applied in a rightful way. So there is a kind of practical nature to knowledge. There is an importance to knowledge. And there's also a certain wisdom that people demonstrate when they are not only smart and bright and filled with knowledge, but use that knowledge in a way that kind of enables, better society. So at the end of the day, Confucianism is pretty positive philosophy. It's really creating a blueprint for how to improve society. It's like an active doing type of philosophy. This is how we make, our government, our state, our family, better. And a lot of it is related to trying to damper down on chaos and create some degree of social order that's going to be important. And that social order comes from these certain virtues being acted out. Another one is the idea of li, which kind of maybe let's look at as like duty. If somebody has a particular role in the state, fulfilling that particular role would be important, because if everybody's, fulfilling their particular role, then society as a whole is going to work. The problem comes when people go off and do their own thing or have their own, individual goals. And, like think of like, COVID, right? And some of the issues we have, in our society related to that, what's kind of like one's duty, to the larger society. And then finally is xiao, which is the idea of filial piety. This is something related to taking care of those who are older. For example, a son taking care of a father. There was a emphasis on this idea of filial piety, and maybe this exists in a government structure in terms of leaders who are younger and leaders who are older, and elders being really significant. It also exists within a familial structure, a family, where filial piety kind of emphasizes the role of the elders in the family, and the role that children will have in treating, the elders of the family. And, later on, we'll see things like, ancestry and ancestor worship and things like that. Confucianism will broaden over time, and there's some schools of thought related to filial piety that where filial piety becomes a very significant key virtue in later schools of thought about Confucianism. There's a few people after Confucius who will take on his ideas and broaden them. Mencius is one of those. You might have heard of him. There's a few significant leaders who, after the death of Confucius, become, people who carry the ideas further and stretch them into some new places, okay? And that is important. So, these key virtues would be like the goal of the education system. It's not just for the acquisition of knowledge or creating, translated texts and things like that. There's really an ethical goal in terms of what Confucianism was all about. The idea of, kind of this relationship thing, this probably is something that develops a little bit over time, and perhaps in other, in a time period even after the death of Confucius. But this is like a way to think about Confucianism, and maybe, this is, something that makes it like a little bit more tangible if Confucianism is something that's new for you. A lot of times scholars will talk about there being a pair. So one way to look at this is relationships in a family, or relationships between people and their government. Oftentimes there's a pair where there's a superior role and an inferior role. And the idea behind Confucianism is that people play out their role. So whether you're in the superior set or the inferior set, both roles are really important, and they're known to be reciprocal. So for example, a father and son, or a husband and wife, an older brother and a younger brother, or a friend to friend, okay? This idea that, say for example, let's say, father and son. There might be the father as superior and the son as inferior, but it's not necessarily a relationship that's completely one-sided. It's not that the son has to do everything for the father. There's certain assumptions that the father also is going to be able to accomplish certain things for the son, and the relationship works, and order is created in society when both parts of the pair fulfill their role. So there is like an adherence, in a sense, to certain roles, and in some cases these roles become very ritualized. And in our society too, we have a great number of rituals, right? Whether it's a graduation ceremony. So I was on a college campus yesterday, and there was a graduation ceremony. That's a ritual, right? That kind of suggests something is, ending, and maybe something else is beginning. But we have a lot of other, informal rituals, like before COVID, people would meet each other, introduce themselves, shake their hands. These certain rituals are kind of creating the social norms that establish people's roles, where people are able to, kind of find themselves in an ordered society. There's a lot more chaos without those kinds of rituals, and maybe Confucianism is focused on some of those. Okay, this idea of the family as a really important kind of area for Confucius thought is really significant, and some scholars would argue that the family and the relationships between family members becomes like the basis, in a sense, for the relationship between people and the government, where the government has almost like a paternal type of way of making things work for the people. And when it no longer does, that's where we see the mandate of heaven. But the idea is that, the government kind of has to do its part, and then the people have to do, their part in the roles. And that's the idea behind Confucianism. Some of the sayings in the Analects might include something like this: do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. So Confucius had a variety of different sayings and ideas that spoke about people's behaviors and mindsets in the way they would work together with other people. I'm going to mention this last thing, and due to time, I'm not going to go into Taoism in a lot of detail, but around the time that Confucianism is blooming, in the 500s BCE, Taoism also comes to be. And both of these are unique because they have origins in China, and both of these will be spread to Korea and Japan, and will be really important ideas in the post-classical period, which is, 1,000 years later. So we're looking at ideas that have been around for some time. And one way for us to introduce Taoism a little bit is to compare it a little bit with Confucianism, where Confucianists are really, and sometimes some scholars would call Confucianism a little bit of a conservative ideology. By the time of the post-classical period, it's really scholars who have roles in the state, who have gained their education and their place in the government through the civil exam. They've demonstrated to society that they could pass this really difficult exam, and that they know Confucianism and the Confucian texts, inside and out. And then they have a certain kind of traditional ideology. Some of that is a worldview that gets challenged in some cases by Buddhism, which is going to be new in China in the post-classical period, and also Taoism. Confucianism is a focus on relationships, of course. To some degree, it establishes a hierarchy. Merchants, for example, the Confucian idea is that merchants don't really produce anything. They're only profit-making, so they tend to be lower in the status, kind of hierarchy. And so maybe Confucianism is, to some degree, you could also argue it's egalitarian, because there is an interest in enabling people from all social classes to be able to participate at the highest levels of state. This idea of rituals, it has a moral purpose, it has key texts, so there is a consultation of key texts and ideas, but the whole thing is really focused on improvement and the belief that one can improve the government and make it better. Taoism, the basic idea is that there is not necessarily a role for humans to tamper with government, that there is a certain kind of there is a way, there's a flow to the natural world, and humans would be best to not get conflict with the natural harmony that are found in natural patterns. Humans should largely fit into the larger world. Like, humans are small to Taoists. Humans are not really able to control and reform to the degree that humans think they can. So, Taoists are going to have a little bit different of an answer for how to deal with chaos. They are less focused on human concerns, much more interested in how one feels than in consulting texts and writings, and they're much more skeptical about how we know what we know. Confucians really believe this is how we know what we know. Taoists are going to question lots of things. How do I know if yesterday I dreamt that I was a butterfly? How do I know that today I'm not a butterfly dreaming that I'm a human? They challenge, in a sense, lots of things and suggest that really it's natural patterns in the world that harmonize, and we need to find our place in this larger natural pattern. So Wu Wei is the basic ideology of Taoists. Take no action. it doesn't really mean don't do anything and be lazy and sit on the couch eating popcorn, but don't go against the natural order of things. Kind of have a read on the larger picture and don't go against the natural order of things. And in the time period of